I'm Brett, and this is Tabletop Sagas. This is the first video on the channel, and for 2024 I decided I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to be starting the Mongolians in 10mm. The intention is to use these for Hail Caesar and do it in centimetre scale rather than in inches, so that way I can turn my 6x4 board that I've got at home into a 15 by 10 foot effectively, and really increase the size and give plenty of movement. So we're going to do a bit of a painting video today, and I'll jump in and show you what I've been working on. So these Pendraken minis are really nice. Being brand new to the 10mm scale, I wasn't sure what to expect, but honestly I was blown away by the detail here. There was a little bit of cleanup needed, as expected. There's a support of some kind underneath all of the cavalry, and a little flash that might need cleaning up, but nothing major here. I did find that later there can be a small mould line running down the centre of the horses' heads on occasion, so definitely watch out for that, but it's nothing that a model knife or a small metal file can't clean up. And if you're a bit stricter than me on cleanup, there's the typical underneath of the back of the horse's legs that is a difficult area, it seems, to cast even at this scale, so you can pay attention to this, but no one will ever see it, so I really wasn't too worried. With cleanup done, I've got them all stuck down on tongue depressors to make batch painting easier, because for these tiny minis, you don't want to be trying to pick them up while you're painting them. Firstly, I'm going to address that yes, I'm left-handed, and like an idiot, I decided to record over my left shoulder, completely blocking the camera's view when I was airbrushing. So I'm going to go through that part really quickly. Don't worry, by the time that I start with the brush, I'd realised my mistake and we'll switch over to the right side. Now I move on to the painting. I did initially try to prime these with a light grey so that I could get some nice bright base colours on and then bring things together with a wash, but after trying this with the first one I really couldn't tell what bits were bare metal and what had been primed. I think my eyes might be starting to go a little bit, I guess, but I couldn't be bothered, and the aim of this is to try and get these onto the tabletop. So I changed course and got them coated in a black primer. I could have gone in then with a zenithal with a white from above, but again, because of the speed, I decided to skip that and get the base colours on with the airbrush as quickly as I could. Looking at the minis, I wasn't sure how to proceed, so I did something that I don't do anywhere near enough, and hopped over onto the computer to look at some reference images. Don't get me wrong, I'm not too worried about 100% accuracy here, but in particular, I wasn't sure on colours for the clothes and the armour. In the end, I settled on leather colour and blue and red for the coats for the archers, and then just stuck to the leather for the lamellar of the heavy cavalry, with then some accents in the red and the blue. If anyone has any recommendations for other colours that I could use, I would love to hear about them in the comments down below, but these were the main examples that I saw from a Google search. I know that the Mongols were expected to supply their own kit, so I'd love to have some suggestions for other dyes or colours of leather or fur that might have been used at the time. I do want to make the army look more like it was pieced together from across the entirety of the Eurasian steppes. So with that settled, I loaded up the airbrush and got a nice leather base coat on all of the men, with the plan to come back in later with the brush and add in that variation that I'd mentioned. Next, to increase the variety of the army, I did a base colour for the horses with the airbrush. I just would pick up a stick of minis and they all got the same colour. Then when I felt I had enough, I'd switch out the colour in my airbrush. I didn't give this too much thought and wanted to create a bit of randomness in this. At this scale, I was admittedly a little worried about overspray and that it could have been a bit difficult to put two base coats on, but I honestly needn't have worried. Yes, it does take a bit of work, and I would recommend using thin, transparent paint to build up the colour on the horses and being really light with your trigger finger to minimise any risks. But honestly, with a bit of practice and some patience, it is doable on these minis. Plus, the wash later I do think will help to hide any of those mistakes where you might get a little bit of overspray. So with the first few steps done, I could tidy things up a bit and put away the airbrush for now. And this is how things are looking so far. I have got a dog mini that I haven't talked about yet to use for a banker breed of dogs, if I think I've pronounced that correctly, but let me know if not. He's simply painted using a chestnut colour and then a random black pattern. So I won't be focusing on him too much in this video, but he is another Pendraken mini, but he's from their 20mm scale range, because bankers, again, hope I've said that right, are seriously big dogs, and that gets about as close as I could figure to how big they would be compared to the horses in this scale. We're finally onto the brushwork now, and I'm just adding in some more variety, as I mentioned, by going in and picking out a couple of the coats, maybe a pair of trousers or a hat on each stick, and then moving on. With that done, I quickly go around and pick out the small amount of metal, so that's the tips of the lances, the swords, and the club-like thing that the miniature I'm using as a commander has. And with that, we're ready for the first round of washes. Now, I haven't even looked at the skin yet, don't worry about that though, that's going to come later. I'm using brown washes and black washes at this point to pick out the recesses and the finer details of what I've already worked on, and I don't trust myself to keep away from certain smaller areas like the faces of the minis, so we're not worrying about those at the minute. I give a healthy coat of brown for any, well, browns, and also reds, and then everything else just gets a black wash. With those safely dry, I come back in with some tanned flesh and pick out the hands and faces with a quick layer of paint, and then a flesh wash. It's at this point where I probably did the only thing that I'm not ultimately happy with on these minis though. Simply put, these minis are all painted in a slight variation of my process for painting Caucasian flesh, and Mongolians aren't Caucasian, so that is ultimately wrong. And while I'm not too concerned about 100% realism on these minis, that is something that I want to improve for the next round of minis. The truth is, I don't really have any experience painting Asian skin tones, so I tried to use a bronzed flesh base colour and then the old GW Reichland flesh shade over it, and it went in far too into the red overtones for my liking. Now, some might argue that it's fine, and for the scale they look good enough, and yeah, I'm going to learn to accept them as they are for now. But honestly, if anyone does have any recommendations for a kind of base and wash combo to get better Asian looking skin tones, please let me know in the comments, or recommend any other YouTube videos where that's been covered, because that is one thing on these minis I really do want to get better on. Anyway, with that out of the way, here's how they look now, and honestly at this point they could be based and put on the tabletop and I wouldn't be upset, but this took next to no time per mini, and I thought that I could do a little bit more to make them pop. So I decided to go in with a first round of highlighting to bring the models up a bit. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail with that, as it was just taking the original base colours and hitting the upward facing parts of the mini to brighten them up. The most I did was for the dark grey horses. I went for a slightly lighter than my original base colour, and with that I was done with the painting. So it's back out with the airbrush. Luckily I've got my camera on the right hand side now, so you can actually see a bit more of what I'm doing to get the minis varnished. I'm someone who always does a quick, nice matte varnish over all of my minis. I like to get them to a nice uniform consistency across the mini, but as I'm sure a lot of you will know, this is especially important for metal minis. I'm terrible for dropping minis during the painting stage. I've already had to do a few touch-ups here and there to cover some chips, but that's the risk that you take with metal minis. With that, I can call these done and get them stuck onto the bases. The bases themselves are roughly in the right scale for Hail Caesar, but in centimetres scale, with 60 by 40mm bases from Pendraken for the medium cavalry, and 40 by 40mm bases for the small cavalry. I did have to print these off though, as apparently they're quite a popular base size, and Pendraken didn't actually have any in stock at the time when I ordered. With these bases, I did give them a quick coat of an earth colour. I'm intending to base them with more, but in case of any basing materials coming off, I always find that it's safest to have a starting colour to hide any patches in the future. This is the current state of the models and they're all ready to be based. For this, I'm using some of the Geek Gaming Scenics small scale base ready and some PVA. I love their products as it's just a case of getting the glue on there, dunking the model in a box of the stuff, and then once it's all dry, going back in with some diluted PVA to lock everything in. I think it gives a far nicer look than anything that I could do with just painting, and it's so much faster. And with that, I'm calling the models done, and up to a nice standard for the tabletop. Now, they aren't going to be winning any awards for painting, obviously, but they took about 20 minutes a mini to paint up, which is something that I could probably get faster at as I refine what I'm doing with them. And this is a project that does feel achievable over 2024 to be able to game nearly any of the 13th century conquests of the Mongols, which is really exciting. And I'm looking at sourcing other kingdoms in this scale, both from Pendraken in their other ranges and also from other companies. I will admit there has been about a week since painting these minis to filming the end results, as I had a small issue with my order of basing supplies from Geek Gaming Scenics. They sent me the large scale product by accident rather than the small scale. Was a little frustrating at the time, but their customer service is amazing. They got it sorted relatively quickly, had the small scale stuff out to me, and while I was waiting, I found myself with some extra time, so I decided to paint up a second division to go along with the first. And since it took me about a week and I was still waiting, I decided to paint up a third division as well. So now I have a reasonably sized army to start my project with, and so I actually think it all worked out for the best in the end. That is everything for this video. I hope you enjoyed seeing a bit of my process. If you have any suggestions or perhaps additional companies that could work in this scale, I'd love to hear about them in the comments down below. And if you want to come along with me on this project, considering subscribing. I'm thinking the next project that I'll be showing off will be some Song Chinese from Irregular Miniatures, so keep an eye out for that, and I'll see you next time.